You're tuning in because you want to get your head around these big, complicated stories shaping our world, right?
Yeah, get the essential info without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. Well, today we're really focusing in on a critical connection in global geopolitics, that link between Iran and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Specifically, we're going deep on how Iran is enabling the Houthis' military power.
And we've pulled together some really useful sources to unpack this. We've got recent news reports, the stuff keeping you updated from places like Newsweek, Al Jazeera, NDTV.
Okay.
But we're also mixing in analysis from the Middle East Institute for that crucial perspective. And there's this really detailed visual report from the Defense Intelligence Agency.
And the DIA report, that one's key, right?
Yeah.
The visual comparison.
It is. It gives us an invaluable side-by-side look at the weapons involved. It's pretty stark.
Okay, great. So our mission today, cut through the noise, look hard at this evidence, and really understand the scale and, well, the implications of Iran's support for the Houthis.
Let's do it.
All right, so to get where we are now, we need to understand how this relationship actually developed. What's the backstory here?
Yeah, the timeline is pretty revealing. There were links before, sure, but this connection between Iran and the Houthis really, cemented itself starting around 2015.
2015. Okay, what was happening then?
Well, that timing lines up with some big events. Notably, the UN Security Council put that arms embargo on the Houthis in April 2015.
Right, the embargo.
Which, ironically, might have actually pushed the Houthis even closer to Iran for, support.
Makes sense.
And we also have to remember the Houthi takeover of Sana'a back in September 2014. That gave them a huge strategic base in Yemen.
And it wasn't just political nods, was it? We've seen actual examples of Iranian gear in specific Houthi actions.
Oh, definitely.
I'm thinking about that Houthi missile attack. Was it on a Turkish ship?
Yeah.
Back in May 2018.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact that the missile system they used was later traced back to an Iranian shipment seized? Well, that says a lot about the direct military link.
It really does, and the timeline just keeps going, with more and more sophisticated weapons showing up. The first time we saw the Houthis use that Iranian-designed Birkin 3 missile, that was August 2019.
It's Birkin 3, right.
That was a clear sign they were getting more advanced strike capabilities. And even before that, actually, back in April 2017, a senior Iranian cleric basically admitted it.
Admitted it?
Yeah, publicly said Iran was providing advanced weapons to the Houthis, pretty much confirmed their whole support strategy right there.
Wow. So it's not just hints or one-offs. The number of times they've actually intercepted Iranian weapons shipments, that's significant too, isn't it?
Hugely significant. Yeah. Between 2015 and 2023, think about this. At least 18 ships smuggling Iranian weapons meant for the Houthis were stopped.
18. That's a sustained effort. A lot of hardware.
It is. And like you said, not just small stuff. We're talking missiles, advanced tech.
Yeah.
And more recently, you've got the Houthi claims of attacks targeting Israel starting October 2023. That shows they're willing to project power way beyond Yemen. Then, fast forward to December 2023, Iran's defense minister issues that direct warning to the U.S.-led Red Sea Task Force.
Right, basically telling them to back off.
Exactly. It underscores how they see their influence, and it ties directly into the Houthi actions messing with shipping in that critical waterway.
So this timeline, it really paints a picture of a deepening strategic alliance. Iran as the key enabler for the Houthis. Let's drill down into the actual weapons. Who in Iran is running this show?
Okay, yeah. The DIA report is pretty clear here. It points directly at Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, the IRGC-QF.
The Quds Force, right, their external operations. Oh.
Precisely. They're identified as the main group responsible for providing these sophisticated weapons, and just as importantly, the training needed to actually use them effectively. And this has been going on since at least 2014.
Since 2014, okay. And as we touched on, the scale. It's big. Those 18-plus interceptions between 2015 and 23, they contain some really worrying stuff, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. It's had a profound impact regionally. You're talking about components for ballistic and cruise missiles, a growing fleet of UAVs, drones, anti-tank guided missiles, lots of other military gear.
Right.
And what's really interesting is the level of integration. The Houthis aren't just getting ready-made weapons off the shelf.
No.
They're actively involved in putting them together, sometimes repainting them, modifying them for their specific needs, and then showing them off under Houthi names.
There's more than just delivery. It suggests a real transfer of tech know-how.
Exactly. A deepening strategic alignment where the Houthis are becoming, more integrated into Iran's bigger regional picture.
So not just arms transfers, but Houthi adaptation too. And we've definitely seen the real-world impact of these weapons, especially in the Red Sea lately.
Absolutely. The way the Houthis have used these weapons has directly hit international shipping there. It's a threat to major global trade routes.
Like that attack on the MV Strenda in December 23, the Norwegian tanker.
That's a perfect example. Hit by a cruise missile. And we've also seen attacks on civilian infrastructure much further away, like the strike on the Saudi Aramco oil facility in Jeddah back in November 2020.
Right, showing they can reach out across the region.
Exactly. It shows a broader capability to project force.
And the DIA report, it also mentioned this established political, financial, and military partnership going back to 2014. There's even that photo, right? The Houthi spokesperson with Iran's supreme leader in 2019.
Yeah, that photo is powerful. It visually seals the deal on this narrative of a close, high-level strategic link.
Okay, so let's zero in on one specific category that's become huge, UAVs. Drones. The DIA report really highlights the growing threat from Houthi UAVs, and it directly links this to Iran basically flooding the region with an advanced drone tech since around 2017. What makes these drones such a game changer here?
What's really important about these UAVs is their strategic impact. They offer quite a bit of range. They're relatively cheap compared to, say, fighter jets.
Right, it's much cheaper.
And they can carry a decent explosive payload. So that combination lets the Houthis pose a real threat to the territory of other countries nearby.
Okay.
It destabilizes an already shaky region, and it can even put pressure on the global economy by hitting shipping lanes or oil facilities. It's that low-cost, high-impact thing that makes them so attractive and dangerous for groups like the Houthis.
And the report gets specific, comparing Houthi drones to known Iranian ones. Let's start with the Sayad, or what the Houthis call the Samad. What stands out there?
Yeah, the Houthi claimed range for the Sayad, or Samad, is pretty impressive, maybe 1,800 kilometers, payload around 20 to 50 kilos.
That's quite far.
It is. And when you look at the pictures, the visual evidence, it's almost identical in design to the Iranian Sayad. You see the same landing skid underneath, that distinctive V-shaped tail, the pitot tube sticking out the nose, the slim body, the way the control surfaces are designed. Even pieces recovered from crashed Houthi Sayads show these features consistently.
So maybe minor tweaks, but the basic design is clearly Iranian.
Exactly. You might see different antennas, maybe for different jobs, but the core design, undeniably Iranian.
Okay, moving on. The Shahed 136. The Houthis call it the Way 2. This one's gotten a lot of attention elsewhere too, hasn't it?
It certainly has. The estimated range for the Shahed 136, the Way 2, is even bigger, maybe 2,500 kilometers. Payload around 50 kilos.
Wow.
And again, the DIA report points out the striking similarities with the Iranian Shahed 136, those very recognizable delta wing stabilizers.
Right, the sort of triangular wings.
Yeah, the short, blunt nose where the pitot tubes are placed, the whole tube-like body. And what's really telling is you see these exact features, not just on Houthi drones and Iranian ones,
but also the Russian ones in Ukraine, the Gerin 2.
Precisely, the Gerin 2. The shape, the size of those wing stabilizers, even some markings, they look remarkably similar across all three. It strongly suggests they all came from Iran originally. A clear pattern of proliferation.
That design consistency across different groups and different wars.
Yeah,
that points to a direct tech link. What about the Shahed 131, the Houthi Wade 1?
The Shahed 131, or Wade 1, still packs a punch. Estimated range around 900 kilometers, maybe a 20-kilo payload.
Still significant.
Definitely. And again, the DIA report highlights these unique design features it shares with Iran's Shahed 131, like the wing stabilizers being positioned above the main delta wing.
Ah, okay. Different placement.
Yeah, plus the short nose, the pitot tubes, that tube-like body again. And just like the 136, these features are also consistently seen on the Russian Gerin 1 drone.
So Gerin 1 matches the Shahed 131, Gerin 2 matches the Shahed 136.
Exactly. It just reinforces the conclusion of a common Iranian origin and, a likely pathway for how this tech got out there.
Okay, so across their main UAVs, the visual evidence really does suggest a direct Iranian source for the tech. Maybe even the whole drones or kits.
Right.
Now, let's shift to missiles. The DIA report talks about a diverse and increasingly sophisticated arsenal there, too.
Absolutely. Since at least 2015, Iran's been supplying the Houthis with a whole range of short and medium-range ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, including anti-ship versions.
Anti-ship missiles, right.
And this has fundamentally boosted the Houthis' ability to hit targets on land and at sea. It's really changed the security equation in the region.
Okay, the report breaks down several specific systems. Let's start with the Qiyam, or Rezvan, which the Houthis call the Birkin 3. What's the connection there?
The Houthi Burkan 3, it's demonstrated hitting targets about 1,200 kilometers away, carries about a 250-kilo payload.
Okay.
And the DIA analysis points to the payload section and those small rear fins being almost identical to Iran's Qiyam or Rezvan missiles.
And we've seen both sides use them.
Yes. Houthis have used the Burkan 3 since 2019, and Iran used Qiyam variants in that 2020 strike on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, remember?
I do.
Even debris found after Houthi Burkan strike shows markings and fuel ports that match up with the Iranian Qiyam.
Pretty clear link. Okay, what about something with longer legs? The Shahab 3, which the Houthis call the Tufan.
Right. The Houthi claimed range for the Shahab 3 or Tufan is huge, 1,950 kilometers. And a big payload, too, 800 kilos.
That's MRBM territory, medium-range ballistic missile.
It is. And the DIA assessment says its overall shape, especially the payload section and the rear fins, lines up with Iran's Shahab 3 MRBM.
But have they actually fired it?
That's the key point. It's important to note there are no confirmed cases of either Iran or the Houthis actually launching this specific system operationally. Displayed, yes. Fired, no confirmation.
Interesting. Okay, then there's the Khaibar Sheikhan, or the Houthi Haitem. What's the story there?
Iran claims a range of 1,450 kilometers for its Khaibar Sheikhan with a 500-kilo payload. The Houthi Haitem, which they showed off in 2022, looks almost identical, again, especially the payload section and the rear fins. Now, interestingly, Iran has used the Khaibar Sheikhan operationally against ISIS targets in Syria just this year, in 2024.
But the Houthis haven't used their version, the Henem.
No known cases of the Houthis using the Henem in combat, no.
Okay. Shifting to shorter range, the Fei 110 or the Houthi Qarar, what does the comparison show?
That's right. Houthi claimed range for the Qarar is 300 kilometers, 500-kilo payload. And the DIA's visual comparison shows nearly identical features, especially the front and rear fins, compared to Iran's Fate 110.
Has that one seen action?
Iran has used Fate 110 variants in Iraq. But again, like some of the others, no confirmed operational use by the Houthis themselves.
All right, let's turn to the anti-ship capability, the Khalij Fars, or ASIF. That seems like a key system given the Red Sea situation.
It really does. The Houthi claimed range for the ASIF is 400 kilometers, 500-kilo payload. And the DIA points to nearly identical features again, the front and rear fins, compared to Iran's Fate 110 anti-ship version, which is the Khalij Fars.
So derived from the Fate 110 family.
Seems likely. And while Iran hasn't operationally launched its Khalij Fars, the Houthis have recently fired anti-ship ballistic missiles, ASBMs, in the Gulf of Oman and the Red Sea, so they are actively using this type of weapon.
Okay, that's a significant distinction. They're using the capability even if Iran hasn't used its specific name version. What about the Zoair, or Tankil missile? Same pattern.
Pretty much. Houthi claimed range for the Tankil is 500 kilometers. Payload is unknown right now. The DIA points out the front and rear fins look almost identical to the Iranian Zoair, and these fin designs are pretty unique to these systems.
And operational use?
None confirmed. No operational launches of the Zoair or Tankil by either the Houthis or Iran that we know of.
Got it. Let's switch to cruise missiles now. The Project 351 Pava, which the Houthis call the Quds 4, that one stands out because of its claimed range.
It does. The Houthi claimed range for the Quds 4 is very significant, around 2,000 kilometers. Payload is unknown.
2,000 kilometers. That's serious reach for a cruise missile.
Absolutely. And the DIA analysis highlights similar design features and key parts it shares with the Iranian Project 351 series and also the new Pava land attack cruise missile, or LACM.
Similarities like what?
Things like the engine design, the shape of the rear fins, the booster section used for launch. And what's really notable is the intel suggesting Iran has been supplying components for the Quds 4 to the Houthis since at least 2019.
Supplying components, not just finished missiles.
Right, which fits with that idea of assembly and adaptation we talked about earlier. And debris recovered from Houthi Quds missile strikes shows features consistent with Iranian LACM parts wings, engines, tail sections, fins, mounting brackets.
Okay, that's compelling. Finally, there's the 358, or Houthi Sak. That's a surface-to-air missile, right? An anti-aircraft weapon.
Correct, ISAM. The Houthi claimed range for the SOC is somewhere between 100 and 150 kilometers, carries a high explosive warhead.
And the Iranian link.
Again, the DIA comparison shows nearly identical features to the Iranian 358 SAM. That's the one Iran even showed off to Russian military officials in 2023.
Wow.
Key similarities are the fins mounted near the front, those distinctive X-shaped fins at the back, and the engine design.
Have the Houthis used it?
Reportedly, yes, against U.S. drones. And Iran is also known to have passed this system along to other proxy groups in Iraq and Lebanon.
Okay, so the weight of evidence, looking across both drones and this whole range of missiles, it really points strongly towards Iran providing not just tech, but whole systems, or at least key components, to the Houthis, doesn't it?
It really does. It indicates a substantial and ongoing supply chain.
So let's connect this to what's been happening recently, the escalations we've seen. How does this military support feed into the current tensions in the region?
Well, you have to see Iran unveiling that new missile capable of hitting U.S. targets in the context of rising tensions with the U.S., right? Over the nuclear program, Iran's activities across the region.
It's military signaling.
Exactly. It's often seen as Tehran pushing back against what it sees as growing international pressure.
And this happens just as we see that Houthi missile strike near Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, which understandably got a very sharp reaction from Israel.
Precisely. Israel immediately vowed to retaliate against Iranian-backed groups. And then you heard Iran's defense minister issue that stark warning.
Right, saying if the U.S. or Israel starts a war, Iran will hit their interests.
Yeah. And the fact that Israeli air defenses apparently didn't intercept that Houthi missile near such a sensitive spot like Ben Gurion, that's also a really significant point to consider. Raises questions.
And Israel's defense minister hit back with that warning of a sevenfold response.
Yeah.
That kind of talk definitely raises the stakes.
It certainly does. And we saw the immediate practical effects too, didn't we? Flights grounded temporarily at Ben Gurion, major airlines canceling flights.
Right. It shows the real disruption these attacks can cause.
Exactly. Hits civilian infrastructure, international travel.
So pulling back to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
What are the wider geopolitical consequences of this deepening Iran-Houthi military tie-up and these recent escalations?
Well, we're seeing a clear pattern of, assertive military moves from Tehran. The risk of a wider regional war is definitely higher, especially when diplomacy stalls like the nuclear talks being postponed recently. That leaves a vacuum where tensions can just escalate more easily.
Right.
Plus, you've still got the rhetoric from former President Trump about potential strikes if there's no new nuclear deal. That just adds another layer of uncertainty, potential for miscalculation.
And what about the Houthis themselves? What's their strategy in doing these kinds of provocative things?
Well, analysis like from the Middle East Institute suggests the Houthis might be deliberately trying to provoke a strong Israeli reaction.
Why would they do that?
The thinking might be to internationalize the conflict, to rally support from pro-Palestinian groups, others critical of Israel. And with backing from Iran, maybe even Russia, they likely see a chance to challenge U.S. and Israeli influence in the region.
It sounds like an incredibly tricky balancing act for the U.S., its Gulf partners, and Israel then. How do you stop these Houthi attacks, which Iran is clearly enabling, without accidentally starting a much bigger, devastating regional war?
That is the absolute core dilemma. They need a strategy to deter the Houthis effectively, but they have to be incredibly careful not to trigger a wider conflict. The U.S. especially is juggling a lot, trying to protect shipping, keep the Gaza conflict contained, but also keep diplomatic options open for Yemen's civil war.
And the Saudis want a political deal in Yemen too, right?
Yeah, the Saudis have really prioritized trying to find a negotiated political end to the Yemen war.
And looming over all of this is the risk of a direct fight between Israel and Iran. How do these Houthi actions play into that?
That remains a huge and worrying risk. There are these unknown unknowns, you could say, about where exactly Israel's red lines are for hitting Iran directly.
Meaning Tehran might not know what specific action would trigger a direct Israeli strike on Iran itself.
Exactly. Tehran might be unsure at what point Israel decides deterrence requires hitting Iranian assets directly, not just proxies like the Houthis or Hezbollah. And that ambiguity, well, it creates a high risk of miscalculation by either side.
With potentially severe, unpredictable consequences for everyone.
For the entire region, yeah.
Okay. This has been a really deep and honestly quite sobering look at a very complex, volatile situation. So to kind of bring it all together for our listeners, what's the main takeaway from our deep dive today on the Iran-Houthi connection?
I think the overwhelming evidence we've looked at really points strongly to Iran playing a critical role, a pivotal role, in seriously boosting the Houthis' military power. It's through this consistent supply of advanced weapons, drones, missiles, the whole package.
Right.
The visual evidence from the DIA, the timeline, the intercepted shipments, it paints a very clear and frankly concerning picture of this deepening strategic alliance and the flow of Iranian military tech.
And the implications of this ongoing support are huge, potentially destabilizing for the whole region.
Absolutely. It has direct, real consequences for regional stability. We see it in the attacks on shipping, on civilian infrastructure, and it carries that very real, very worrying potential for a much bigger, much more destructive conflict, especially with tensions already so high across the Middle East.
This has been genuinely insightful, even if it is unsettling. It really highlights how interconnected all these players are and how this military tech flows around in this critical part of the world. It kind of leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When you see this kind of state support for non-state groups,
Mm-hmm.
what are the long-term consequences elsewhere, in other global hotspots?
Mm-hmm.
And what should you, as someone trying to stay informed, be watching next to really get a handle on how these dynamics are evolving in this incredibly complex and high-stakes situation?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.